Hello and welcome to Current Issues with me, Tarun. Is there a need to balance the need for coal royalty, which is levied on for the coal producers, and the industry's cost of production? Is there a need to balance these two at a time when states are also relying on these royalties for their revenue? A central government committee is already working on the coal royalty rates. It is yet to decide. Currently, the coal royalty rates are at 14%, but should progressive revision of coal royalty be mandatory or should happen, given the fact that every percent increase in coal royalty also means that the input cost or the raw material cost of coal goes up, which affects the competitiveness of the industry and increases the cost of production of power also. So, given wide implications of this kind of a decision, we discuss this issue today with former Coal Secretary Alok Parti. He is also on a committee in the Ministry of Environment, the Expert Appraisal Committee in the Ministry of Environment and Forests. He chairs the committee as chairman. We also have in studio with us Mr. B. Akla. Mr. B. Akla is the former chairman and managing director of Central Coalfields Limited. He also chaired as chairman the CMPDI, comes with an experience of 5 decades in the sector. I go across to former Coal Secretary Mr. Parti and ask him his opening comment on this issue.
Well, let me give a little background to coal royalty as we see it in the Indian context. Coal royalty is levied on ores, or rather on coal, and royalty is levied on many other ores on the basis of the provisions in the MMDR Act. That is the Minor Minerals Development Regulation. Prior to 2011, the coal royalty used to be a mix of fixed and ad valorem. Then a lot of discussion took place at that point of time into saying whether we should have an ad valorem based coal royalty, and in 2011 the government, under the relevant provisions of the law, notified coal royalty as 14% of the price.
Yes.
Now, this was arrived at a certain logic which was there. The previous averages were calculated and it was seen that it was around 11 or 12%. It was coming out to about 11-12%. And then there were a lot of pressures from the state. There is normally a committee which is set up under an additional secretary in the Ministry of Coal that looks at royalty through a consultative process with the state governments. The states always wanted very high royalties because that means higher revenues for them.
Yes.
A compromise was reached, I think, with the West Bengal government really charging very high. Even today, they have a cess added which is to royalty, and their total collection is something maybe about 22% or 23%.
That's huge.
But it has been limited to the coal production of a particular year which goes back, and therefore in terms of finite amount it is still less.
Okay.
But 14% was taken as an average that is to be done now.
14%.
14% in 2011.
11.
Now, just one more thing I wanted to add before you take the discussion forward.
Yes.
14% appeared very high.
Yes.
Even in those days, as a percentage when we compare it with other countries of the world, as a percentage on the price. But then the logic was that coal prices in India are very low.
Yes.
Compared to the international prices.
So that's why you justify.
And therefore we kept the royalty at that level.
Okay.
That was the justification at that point of time.
Okay.
Now, it's right that this is again a tax which is getting passed on to the consumer.
Yes.
Whether it is the domestic person using electricity in his house, or whether it is the industry which is using the electricity,
yes,
all have to pay for it. Unfortunately, the largest share of all the increases in tariff goes to the industry, and therefore, when you say that is making it non-competitive, it is true.
Okay.
But the states also have a right, in the sense that they are the ones who hold the land, and all over traditionally, or rather even otherwise in the mining world, royalties are given to people who hold the land and under which the ore
In that
exists.
sense, they are right.
They are right.
But on the rates, you have a bit of a point.
I have a bit of a
Okay,
point,
I'm
yes.
going across to Mr. Akla, the former chairman and managing director of Central Coalfields Limited. Sir, what would be your opening comment on this issue?
Again, I will go back to the name itself. The royalty is a tax by the king. The royalty, the very name itself you will find, the royalty is still kept. The citizen giving the tax to the kings
Yes.
in the olden days,
Yes.
that is how the royalty came in. As Mr. Parthi has correctly told, the land and the mineral, the owner is the state.
Yes.
So, that is why the state expects some revenue from that mineral which he owns,
Yes.
which the state owns. Now, having said that, there has to be, even those times the kings were levying the tax with the citizen in such a way they used to give it, at the same time the king used to give back for the welfare of the people.
Yes.
So, I think if that calculation is made, I think there is nothing called big, more or less. It has to be appropriate. It has to be appropriate. Or royalty, yes, the state has to get the royalty, otherwise because there is no other, the income has to be generated and it must come. But depending upon the time and the need and the schemes, it must go back to the people's.
Okay. Mr. Akla, you've spent about 5 decades in the industry. You've seen the industry grow ground up, at least in post-independent India. How have royalties grown in the past decades?
Actually, it has been always on the increasing side only, because it used to be average about 5 to 6 years every time it gets old, 4 years it becomes, there is a demand. Normally there is a demand and a committee is made, it takes 2-3 years maximum, and then the average time gap, the band was about 5, 6, 7 years. Now that the demand has come very soon.
Yes.
If I may correct,
Of course, yes.
I think the law says that not before 3 years you can change royalty. So,
So I think
it
April
has been
2012, sir? It
no,
was in
2011.
April 2011.
11.
Yes.
And the committee probably was set up in 2014, which is now probably coming up with its recommendations. It says you can't change royalty before 3 years. So, the interpretation has been probably the other way, is that after 3 years you get a legitimate right to raise royalty.
Well, Odisha has said, sir, that Odisha, the data I have says the royalty was last revised in April 2012 and fixed at 14% on the sale of coal. And Odisha gets about 1200 crore and it has been demanding a revision. So have been other states.
Yes.
Sir, when such a proposal comes to you, as somebody who chairs the ministry, how are decisions taken? Because one, the state demands that I need funds for development. Second, you have to balance the Indian industry's competitiveness as a whole globally. You get demands from the industry on one end saying that, okay, if we can't export abroad because things are getting expensive, our cost of production is growing up, the states are saying we need funds for development. How would you take a decision? It's walking a very tight rope, isn't it?
It is a tightrope, but the past experience has shown that the decisions are to a large extent more in favor of the states, less in favor of the industry.
Yes.
But that reason I would say is that we had the advantage in this country of 2-3 things. One is cheap labor.
Yes.
The other was sometimes, if you look at coal as cheap raw material.
Yes.
But both these issues, if you see, cheap labor is also becoming less. It's more expensive today. Raw material cost is going up, and the raw material cost is impacting, as you said, as a cascading effect on many other issues. That logic is reaching its limit.
Yes.
If we look at other countries, Indonesia is an odd example.
Yes.
Indonesia levies 13% royalty,
13%.
but it is levied at a very high price.
Okay.
It's levied on items that are exported at the price which is international, not at the local price.
Okay.
It's a very peculiar way of assessing.
Yes.
But because that is one of the largest revenue collections which the country does.
The country depends on
Depends
coal
on a
export
lot of coal export is there. It's
Yes.
I think 75% of coal produced in Indonesia is
So,
exported.
you mean it's a primary business.
It's a primary business. So, we cannot really compare ourselves
our
with
economy.
them. If you look at Australia, the rates are much lower.
Australia rates are
Yes,
lower.
but Australia again is an open market economy, and therefore, the international prices prevail.
Okay.
They talk on international prices.
Yes.
In India, when we are looking at coal royalty today, we must look at what is happening to the coal prices. That is very important.
Yes.
And if we see that, then coal prices are basically determined by Coal India.
Yes.
And there was a principle applied for various grades. The idea was that for very high grades of coal that is comparable to the best coals available in the international markets, say 6,000 kilocalories,
Yes.
and around about that, the principle was that you will sell it at a discount of 15% of the international price. This was the way by which prices were of higher grades were being fixed by Coal India.
Yes.
And other prices were actually fixed on the basis of cost plus. There were no principles involved in fixing those prices as such, except cost plus. Today, we have a situation where people in the coastal areas are probably preferring imported coal to high grade Indian coal, because high grade Indian coal is comparable or sometimes even costlier.
Yes.
So, if you are comparing prices internationally, and that is the basis on which that is some input as to what royalties should be put on, then I think we have reached a level where there is hardly a scope to increase royalty.
That's a very important point. I am going to Mr. Akla and going to ask him. Mr. Parthi says there is hardly any scope now to increase royalty further because we have peaked. Now, as somebody who headed Central Coalfields Limited, sir, if you had to give a recommendation to say Mr. Parthi, who was Secretary Coal, what would you give?
I think we have to wait and because already the 14% is considered to be high in taxing on the consumer as well as the end users. Now, besides that, the DMF has come in, District Mineral Fund,
Yes.
which has been given to every district
Yes.
where the mining is going on. That is an additional revenues that is going to the state. State, of course, this is particularly to the area where the mineral is being produced. So, with this supplement revenue to the state, I think what has been already given, I think there has to be a very calculated and a very cautious and a balanced kind of analysis after doing that only, because we will not be able to, because there are so many figures to be seen.
There is a committee which was formed in July 2014 to recommend additional royalty or whatever decision on royalty may be rolling back. I do not think so, it will roll back, but there will be addition. Do you believe that they have a very challenging task to manage the industry's competitiveness?
Surely the committee must have been given the guidelines and the scope and the norms.
Yes.
Because as I told you, there are so many issues to be looked into. It is not that one aspect only, because states have their own points to say, and the center has to decide seeing this thing and across because this money goes to only the coal producing states,
yes,
not to all other the states, because other states where there is no coal, they are deprived of this money. This kind of revenue is not there
and
at all.
Also, coal producing states in India traditionally have not been as industrialized as compared to say Maharashtra, which is not primarily coal.
Yes. So I think with seeing those guidelines and the norms and the scope, I think the committee will have to look into, and then as I told, there is a DMF which has already come in between, I think 2015, from 15 onwards, that money is also, revenue is also coming to the states. I think the rate revision has to be done in a balanced and in a.
Would you agree, sir, with Mr. Parthi when he says that we have already peaked in a sense with 14%?
More or less, yes. I think because now any increase may not be so very, useful, or it will be even counterproductive to the overall economy, overall common man's purpose.
Okay. If somebody as somebody who chaired Central Coalfields Limited, if you had some inputs to give to Mr. Parthi, who was in the secretariat, what would you give on coal royalty? Because as somebody operating in the state, you would also know what the state needs in terms of development funds. You also know, because you operate a plant, that the cost of production will go up if the coal royalty increases. If you wanted to give some input to Mr. Parthi, what would that be as somebody who headed a public sector undertaking?
I would request to keep it as low as possible,
Yes.
because at the same time, again as I told you, there are so many other interests, because states have their own interest, and unless and again the end purpose, the end use, if it is properly done, I think probably the money can go.
Yes.
But we have to balance between the end users effect as well as the state's requirement.
Okay, I am going across to Mr. Parthi and asking him, sir, if a state government representative comes to you and asks you that you are the secretary, you are in the central government, what do you understand of my problems of development? You don't want to increase royalty, but this is the easiest way for me to raise funds for development. How would you convince the state that we have peaked, or do you think it will be a very difficult job?
Well, no, I won't say it's a very difficult job. Two things are there. One, my friend said,
yes,
that in 2011 that local area fund was not there.
yes,
It has been introduced for all votes in the new MMDR Act, and that is an addition. It's like a tax which is an addition to royalty. It goes to the areas where the mining takes place, essentially to the states which have got mines. There is a small principle which normally these committees used to follow in assessing the royalty. One is that there are coal producing states and there are coal using states. You have to balance the both sides. The coal using states which don't have mines will always oppose royalty, because that would lead to increase in costs for various things.
yes,
The other principle that used to be followed is that if this state is imposing any cess, tax or any such thing, then that is to be subsumed in that 14%. That means if you are adding a cess of 2-3% of your own on the coal, like transport or education or anything, then that to that extent you got to reduce the royalty. That was the principle that was followed.
Sir, I have a question for you. The industry suffers when a clean energy cess is levied in terms of cost competitiveness. The industry suffers when the coal royalty is levied. But if a state minister comes to you with a proposal saying that, Mr. Parthi, I have a problem. You doubled the coal energy cess or the clean energy cess on coal, but my royalty you are not increasing. So why are you increasing the clean energy cess? Because that clean energy cess is also increasing cost. But if I increase the cost, you have a problem, but you go on increasing the cost. How would you balance that argument?
No,
because this is not my argument. State ministers have made such argument at what was the Mines Ministers Conference held in Jaipur, and this issue was raised by ministers from states.
Now,
do you have a very tough job convincing them? Because they will say, okay, you collected the clean energy fund, you didn't spend it on the intended purpose, you don't want to increase my royalty, but you are at free will to do whatever you want to increasing the cess.
Well, as I told you that increasing the cess, unless it is used with a very objective for which it is being collected, this kind of criticism is bound to happen.
Yes.
But because clean energy, utilization of clean energy cess for the objective for which it was raised, if it had been done and effectively done, the state should have also benefited. But if you look at it from the point of view of purely royalty, then those states which have got coal mines will demand, but those which don't, you have to balance the two. And we are a federal system in which I think we probably cannot take a one-sided view.
Yes.
It has to be balanced, and as I see it today is that if you go on increasing royalties, you may hit a stage where you may be now coming close to what would you say as market prices.
Yes.
And the moment you hit that and you want to increase the price of the raw material by increasing royalty, you may find it difficult to even sell it at certain places.
Okay.
So then it becomes counterproductive. If the coal is not sold, then royalty does not come. So, you have to balance it in such a way that you get your due, but you do not hurt somebody excessively,
Okay.
and you do not create a situation in which this hurt itself
Okay.
creates a problem.
Okay. I am going across to Mr. Akla at this point. Mr. Akla, I would want to ask you, at the Mines Ministerial Conference, when the ministers raised this point that you increased the cess, didn't even use it for the intended purpose, but my royalty you don't want to increase. The industry is anyway suffering, so it is silent because it has no say many times. So somebody, as somebody who heads a public sector undertaking, what would be your point at such conferences? How would you balance the states and the center's needs? How would you do that?
See, right from beginning I have been telling, any levying any tax, whether it is green or whether it is royalty, because everything is coming from the coal, selling or this thing. The purpose, it must be a purpose driven decision or objective driven decision. The objective is to clean energy. If the objective is to make India green, which is a very noble cause and which is the entire, it has to be done, and that is one thing. And here again the states development for their purpose, because they are, it is in their state, they are asking for the royalty. Now, if these are levied, these are fixed on the purpose based or purpose driven or the objective driven, I think these arguments or these complaints wouldn't have been there, as you are telling.
But Mr. Akla, there is one point that I would like to, if a mines minister of a state comes to you and says, Mr. Akla, the coal cess has been increased, my royalty should be increased because people in coal bearing areas bear the brunt of waste, pollution and displacement. The center spends clean energy fund on western states of the country for development of renewable energy. This is what one mines minister made. How would you convince him?
I will tell whatever has happened, okay, but I will see that the fund which is collected for clean energy, I will in future at least I will spend for that purpose.
Oh, that's an important point. I am going close to Mr. Parthi. Same question to you. If a state mines minister asks that, see, my state is bearing the brunt of these things, but the clean energy fund is spent on renewable energy projects which are not in my state. So at least I don't benefit. But it's the coal is taken out from my state. How would you convince him?
The point made is I think a very good point, in the sense that the states that produce the coal have also got a lot of industry that is polluting. Now, having the industry there is of choice. But it is advantageous to have the industry close to the mines, so that you don't carry coal very far, but take out the end product, whether it's electricity or steel or whatever, you take it out from there. Therefore, to some extent, it is in the interest of state to have the industry there, and it is to some extent not valid for him to cry foul that you are polluting my atmosphere through industry. As far as the coal mining is concerned, let me tell you that this has been a disputed point over and over again as to what is the impact of coal mining to the pollution.
Yes.
The coal mining has a certain pollution impact, but the fact is that studies indicated, when you looked at the composite pollution index, we found that the industry around the mine was more polluting than the mine itself.
Okay.
And the mine pollution can be reduced because there are methods of doing it.
Okay.
So, to say that if you are having mines in my area and you are producing that pollution,
yes,
and therefore to compensate that you give me part of the clean cess,
yes,
it's not an extremely valid argument.
But sir, I would like to ask you, if at all, the states have been approaching even the Prime Minister's office, demanding that the royalty, and the chief ministers have been doing it, ministers have been doing it, that it should be increased.
That has always happened.
But sir, if we share the clean energy cess with the states, would it at least abate these demands?
It will abate it, obviously. The purpose of raising this issue is essentially to get a cake of the clean energy cess.
Yes.
They know very well that royalty, there is a limitation to it. You can't go, even if it is 0.5%.
Center is no more to relent on that.
Huh?
Center is no more to relent now with increasing royalty. Even
Royalty is not going to increase very much. The amount of money that you will get through royalty will be through increase of production.
yes.
Not so much by the percentage as such. 14 may become 14.2, 14.3.
In conclusion, if I ask your closing comment on this issue, what would be your closing comment on this discussion?
In this discussion, if you are looking at two issues together, I would say that royalty should not be in fact increased at all, if you ask me, as we are soon approaching a situation where our prices are going to be comparable to market prices, and royalty should take a little dip. As far as the clean cess is concerned, the purpose for which, if it is not used, then I think there is a legitimate demand by the states that let us also share part of it for our own development and schemes.
Okay, I take your point. So, Mr. Akla, so what is your concluding comment for this discussion?
I agree with Mr. Parthi. As far as the royalty is concerned, there has to be a very cautious and a very calculated, very balanced approach to increase, to have a revision on the upper side. Yes, as far as the clean census is concerned, if the states come forward, because as they may be telling, it is the mining area where you are having, mining is polluting my the environment there.
Yes.
There I want to spend some money or take care of that kind of issues.
Okay.
And if they are coming out with the specific purpose with all the states put together, I think there is a point in considering if it is going to the clean energy or to make the green India that way.
Okay. So, thank you gentlemen for joining us on today's discussion. So, as we see it, the point is very important. We have actually peaked as far as the level of royalty that we can lay on coal. It cannot be increased more than 14%, as both the panelists, the former coal secretary and the former chairman of CCL, have opined. But the center can always decide to share a part of the clean energy cess with the states, which it is open to do, because any increase in either the royalty or the cess impacts the cost of production of power, which is in the end paid by the people and the industry at large, and the competitiveness of the Indian industry is affected due to this. Thank you so much for joining us on today's discussion. Thank you.